Hello, this is an example of how to solve a problem asking about central tendency and standard deviation using Excel. So it says below are scores revealing the number of boxes of breakfast cereal in the homes of 25 families. Use Excel to find the following: minimum, maximum, and range. So let's go ahead and set up our situation here. I want to leave enough room for calculations in here, so I'm going to start over here writing our problems for A. So A, minimum, and maximum, and range. And let's go ahead, type our equal sign. Our formula for minimum is equals MIN, opening parenthesis, and then we select our data range. We can see here that we have a lot. I don't like dragging because it tends to run away with me. So I'm going to click in the top cell while I'm in the formula with my cursor just after that parenthesis and hold the Control-Shift down button. Down arrow. Again, Control-Shift down arrow to select everything. And when it's just like this, hit Enter. The program will automatically fill in that closing parenthesis for you. Now we have to do the same for the maximum. And as you might remember, MAX is the command for maximum. Place my cursor in the top cell, hold Control-Shift down arrow to select, and Enter. And the range, of course, is just the maximum minus minimum. And I can see that that's going to be 10. So we're done with number 1. For number 2, we're asked to calculate the median mean, median, and mode. And even though Excel knows these functions, for this assignment, you're expected to do this by hand. So let's write B, and we have to get mean, median, and mode. So we'll do these, I said we'll do these by hand. We're actually always going to do mean in terms of writing out the formula for right now, but median and mode we can command in Excel. For now, though, we're asking to calculate this mean, and the mean, as we know, I'll write the formulas on the side. Mean is the sum of all the scores divided by n. And I always like to write by n down, so I'm going to add it right here. I'm just going to write the n there, and that refers to the number in the sample. I'll write that on the side. And I can see here that it says there are 25 families, but I don't want to always trust that. So I'm going to start by just counting them. So equals count A, I usually use. And then I'll do the same, putting that opening parenthesis, placing my cursor in the top cell, holding Control-Shift down arrow to select all of them, and hitting Enter. And it says there are indeed 25. Now we can calculate the mean. So we're going to write a little bit longer formula here. First equals the sum, as per our formula, the sum of all the scores. So I'm placing my cursor in the top cell, Control-Shift down arrow. But instead of hitting Enter, I'm going to put my parenthesis and divide by the number in the n cell. So now I'm doing the whole formula at once. So once again, this is what the formula looked like. It was the sum of all the scores, closing parenthesis, divided by, and then I clicked in the number cell. For median, we can use the formula, which I think is MDN, but I'm not totally sure. So let's go ahead and look it up in our function. So if we hit on this FX key, we can type a search for median. And we find out that the command is indeed MEDIAN. So let's click OK there. And actually, let's just cancel it and write out the formula. See if we X out of that or not. All right, and let's write it out. Equals MEDIAN, opening parenthesis, and let's select our range by placing the cursor in the top cell, Control-Shift down arrow, and we're not doing anything else here, so we can just hit Enter. So it says the median is 3, the mean is 3.92. What is the mode? Were we asked about mode? Yes, we were. Most commonly occurring number. I think the command is going to be mode, but if that doesn't seem to find anything, we'll look it up. And it says indeed it came up, so it is indeed mode. So I typed in mode, opening parenthesis, cursor placed in the top cell, Control-Shift down arrow, and enter. The mode is also 3. We should have some hints now about what the shape of this distribution is going to be. We've now done A and B, so let's go on to C, sum of squares, variance, and standard deviation. SS, I'll just shorten these now. VAR, you'll recall that's what we use in here, and SD. So the sum of squares, SS, is just the sum of all the deviations squared. And so let's go ahead and figure this out. So first we have to get our deviations, which is always X minus M, or each score minus the mean. And we can do this in a formula now. We'll type equals, we'll select this score, and we'll take minus, and I'm going to select this cell where the mean is because I don't want to write 3.92 because I might make a typo, and I'll hit enter. We can do the same if we wish for each cell. Equals, score, minus, and click in that mean cell. I would like to take advantage of the copy-paste function, but as we well know by now, if we do just copy and paste, let's do it a little further, we're going to start to get errors. And we'll see where we are down here. We have 2 and 2, 3 and 3, 4 and 4. What's going on here? Well, we can see if we click in these cells that Excel is a referential tool, so it's dropping down in rows as the formula gets copied down. So we know we can't do that. In our first week of class, we looked at how to solve this problem. So let's get rid of everything we copy and pasted in. Instead, let's select this cell, and what we want is for our formula to stay in L15, where our mean is. If we click up here, we can see this is correct. It went with this score, X minus M. Everything's in the right place because we can see the red highlight here and the blue highlight here. In order to get it to stay in this row, we have to put that $ before the row. We're not changing columns, so we don't have to do anything before the column. If we were, we could put a $ before the column also, but we're not, so we're just going to leave it as it is. Now we're ready to copy and paste this formula. And so I'm going to, a couple of ways we can do it. We can hover over the magic box in the lower right corner and drag it down. I think we might even be able to double click or something like that. I went ahead and did the drag. Now we check our formula. I'm going to click at any one of these in random, place my cell, my cursor up in the formula bar. I see it chose the correct score, and I see it subtracted the mean. I can see that because of the highlights on those two cells. So I know that if that one is correct, they're all likely to be correct. Now we're ready to square our deviations. We haven't yet looked at the formula for squaring deviations. And so I'm showing it to you right now. Let me make it bold. So to square in Excel, we simply use this little caret and then the 2. And that caret is the uppercase 6. And so we can go ahead and use that for our formula. So we'll go ahead and we'll type equals. We'll click in this deviation. We'll type that upper space 6 to get the caret, enter the 2 to say we want to square it, and we get the square. We can look at it and see that looks right. 2 times 2 is 4. We can see the 0.08 times 0.08 looks about right as well. So that should be good. You might be asking, do we need to include any $signs? And the answer is absolutely not. In this situation, we just want Excel to copy and paste this formula and go to each new cell independently. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's click in a cell at random to see if it did it correctly. We can see here, yep, that cell is highlighted and it looks like it's squared. So we'll be all set with that. Now we're ready to get our sum of squares. The sum of squares, as we saw before, is just the sum of all those squared deviations. Here are our squared deviations. So let's get the sum of that column. So our formula equals sum, opening parenthesis, clicking in the top cell and using Control-Shift down arrow to select all of them and hitting enter. We can always double check our formula by selecting that cell and placing our cursor up in the formula bar and just make sure it included everything. Everything is circled and shaded in blue, so that should be correct. Our variance is just the sum of squares divided by n. And so let's go ahead and get that. My goodness. And so the variance is SS divided by n. Let's go ahead and do that. Start with our equal sign. And then we have to click in the cell with SS, hit divided by, and click in the cell with n. You might be wondering, why don't I just type in 25? I always use the cells if I can, because anytime I type numbers in, there's a bigger chance that I'll make a mistake. So I always use cell references when I can. And our last step is simply to get the standard deviation. The standard deviation is the square root of the variance. You know that we squared everything right here, so we go back down using the square root at this last step. So equals, and the formula for square root is SQRT. SQRT, opening parenthesis, the square root of what? Of the variance. So let's click in that cell and hit enter. And so once again, the formula for square root, I'll write up here, square root is SQRT. And that's the formula in Excel. So now we have finished with C. Create a histogram by hand or using Excel showing the shape of the distribution. So I'll write D here. And so let's go ahead and write histogram. And I recommend that you either use this insert chart function that I'm about to demonstrate, or else do it by hand. You could use insert histogram and do things like that. The histogram function in Excel is not my favorite function, so I really recommend doing it this way, or else just staying with the doing it by hand. There are only 25 in the sample here. So this is how we'll do this little trick I'm going to show you. We're going to highlight just these scores representing the number of cereal boxes. Don't highlight anything else. Next, we're going to go to Insert. And on my computer, we scroll over a bit and we come to Pivot Chart. Hopefully you have that. And when you select it, I didn't quite see what I wanted to there, so let me demonstrate that one more time. We're going to select Pivot Chart. We want to make sure and select Pivot Chart and Pivot Table. I did that by clicking on this little arrow here on the bottom, Pivot Chart and Pivot Table. You'll see that the range is selected, and this is referring to all these numbers that I already selected. And this bottom one is asking you, where do you want to put this? Excel always wants to put it in a new worksheet, which seems rather silly to, well, it's fine if you're doing something else, but for our purposes, we want it in the existing worksheet. And I'm actually going to select this cell right here for where it should be located. And once you select that cell, you can just hit OK. And look what you have, and you might be saying, what's all this nonsense? But this is quite easy. So we're going to select cereal boxes as the variable that's going to represent the categories. The number of cereal boxes are like the values on the histogram. And then we're also going to select cereal boxes and put it down here in values. You'll see it made a histogram for us, but this isn't quite what we want yet, because this is the sum of the number of cereal boxes. And what we want is the count, the frequency So let's click on this tiny arrow. If you look way down where my cursor is, you'll see this tiny arrow, and click on Value Field Settings. This little arrow, and select Value Field Settings. And instead of having sum, select count. Now this is more what we are expecting this to look like. Next, we just have to close those gaps so it looks like a histogram. To do that, click on any one of the bars and all the bars will become highlighted. And right-click and go to Format Data Series. You'll get something that looks like this. Yours might show up on this. It might show up on this with all these special effects. What we want to select is this set of bars on the far right side, and we just want to close up that gap by dragging it down to 0. And now if we hit enter, we see that our histogram looks good. I'm going to do one more thing here. It's not written into the problem, but it's always a good idea to tell what our chart represents. And in this case, our chart represents the number of cereal boxes, number of breakfast cereals per family. We want to always be careful with our titles. I often say, well, what we're actually counting is the number of families with each number of breakfast cereals, but that can be kind of awkward to put into words. And so if someone was just looking at this, it would probably make more sense to them if they read it this way, but you should phrase it in a way so that if you read the title, you understand what it means and you think others will. Now I can see that this isn't exactly where I want it, so I am clicking on the outside frame here till I can drag it over. I'm just going to put it right on top of the frequency chart because we're not required to have a frequency chart. And now we're done with that problem. Our last one says, describe the shape of the distribution and tell which measure of central tendency would be best. To me, this distribution looks skewed. I see this long tail here pointing to the right. And so I would say, going to problem E, the shape of the distribution is skewed right due to a large number of families. Due to a few families having, I'll skip to the next line here, a larger number of breakfast cereals. We can also tell it is skewed because the mean is quite a bit larger than the median and mode. Therefore, the median and not the mean is the best measure of central tendency. And that finishes up this problem. I hope this demo was helpful. Sorry about the dogs in the middle.